Please help me. They're beating my mama. They won't stop hitting her." The words tore through the Sapphire Club like a gunshot through silk. The child's voice cracked with terror so raw it could shatter bone. Her white lace dress hung in tatters, stained with grease and desperation. The beads woven into her cornrows clicked frantically as she stumbled forward, her small brown hands reaching for the one man in the room who hadn't moved, the one man who looked like he'd forgotten how to feel anything at all. The music died. Crystal glasses froze midair. Every killer in tailored suits held their breath because the girl hadn't just interrupted a business meeting. She'd broken into a fortress, and the man she'd chosen to beg wasn't just dangerous. He was Choi Woo-sik, the ice architect of Seoul's underworld, a ghost in designer clothing who hadn't smiled in 5 years. The dragon tattooed along his neck seemed to coil tighter as she gripped his arm, her fingers digging into ink and muscle like she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing left in the world. What happened next didn't just break the rules. It shattered them so completely that everyone who witnessed it would spend the rest of their lives trying to forget. You need to stay until the very end, because what this cold-hearted king does for a stranger will rip your heart wide open and put it back together in ways you never saw coming. Before we dive in, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from so I can send you some love. Now let's step into the moment that changed everything. The bass from the lower floors was nothing but a ghost's heartbeat up here, a distant pulse that Woo-sik had learned to ignore years ago. The Sapphire Club's VIP lounge existed in a bubble of calculated silence, where every breath cost money and every word could end a life. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the neon veins of Gangnam, but the view meant nothing to the men gathered around the obsidian table. They were here for power, not scenery. Woo-sik sat at the head like a king carved from winter itself. His black suit was unbuttoned just enough to reveal the dragon that crawled up from his chest. Its scales rendered in ink so detailed they seemed to shift when he breathed. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face that could have belonged to a marble statue, beautiful, cold, and completely devoid of mercy. Gold glinted at his wrists and throat, but it wasn't decoration. It was a warning. Everything about him screamed control, from the way he held his whiskey glass to the way his eyes tracked movement without ever truly focusing on anything. 5 years ago, Choi Woo-sik had been different. He'd laughed. He'd loved his sister Minna with the kind of devotion that made him reckless. Then she died in an exchange gone wrong, bleeding out in his arms while he screamed for help that never came. The man who survived her wasn't the same man who'd held her hand through childhood nightmares. This version had carved out every soft part of himself and replaced it with ice. He ruled Gangnam with calculated brutality, never raising his voice because he didn't need to. His silence was heavier than any threat. Tonight was routine. His lieutenants murmured reports about territories and profits, their voices hushed like they were in a cathedral. Woo-sik listened without reacting, his expression a perfect mask of indifference. He'd built an empire on the principle that emotion was weakness, that sentiment was the crack where the blade always found its way in. His men feared him, his enemies respected him, and the world had learned not to expect mercy from a man who'd forgotten how to offer it. The security at the Sapphire Club was legendary. 12 men stationed at every entrance, metal detectors, biometric scanners, and enough firepower to start a small war. Nothing got in without Woo-sik's approval. Nothing, until the doors exploded inward. It wasn't a rival gang. It wasn't a raid. It was a 7-year-old girl in a torn white dress, her brown skin gleaming with sweat and terror, her cornrows adorned with colorful beads that clicked like tiny bells as she ran. She moved like a hunted animal, all desperation and instinct, her small feet slipping on the polished floor as she crashed into the center of the room. 3 of Woo-sik's men reached for their guns. Another lunged to grab her. But she was already moving, her target locked with the kind of certainty only children possess. She threw herself at Woo-sik, her hands clamping onto his tattooed forearm with enough force to leave marks. "Please help me," she sobbed, her voice breaking into fragments. "They're beating my mama. They won't stop hitting her." The beads in her hair clicked as she looked up at him, and something shifted in Woo-sik's chest. A sound he hadn't heard in 5 years. A sound that belonged to Minna, who used to wear beads just like these. His hand twitched toward the girl before he could stop himself, then froze midair as years of self-control warred with something older, something human. His men stared, waiting for orders. The room held its breath, and Woo-sik felt the ice around his heart crack, just enough to let in one dangerous thought. What if he could save this one? He stood slowly, his shadow falling over the child like a shroud. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Where? The girl's eyes widened with desperate hope. But before she could answer, the world exploded into chaos. Tires shrieked outside, glass shattered, and the club's alarms began to scream as a rival gang's vehicle slammed into the entrance below, sending tremors through the entire building. Woo-sik's men moved instantly, weapons drawn, shouting into radios. But Woo-sik's eyes never left the child's face. In that moment, surrounded by violence and sound, he made a choice that would unravel everything he'd built. Get her to the car, he said quietly, his hand settling on the girl's head with unexpected gentleness. We're going to find your mother. And somewhere in the chaos, his second-in-command, Junho, lifted a radio to his lips and whispered 6 words that would change the game forever. The dragon is leaving for a child. The girl's name was Serafina, and she'd crawled through ventilation shafts designed to be impenetrable. Woo-sik discovered this as his men swept the building for breaches, finding the loosened grate 3 floors down and the tiny handprints smudged with grease leading up through the metal tunnels. Someone had taught her how to navigate complex structures. Someone brilliant. Woo-sik knelt beside Serafina in the back of his armored Mercedes, the leather seats too large for her small frame. She was shaking, her white dress torn at the hem and stained with oil. Up close, he could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she watched him with a mix of terror and calculation that reminded him of cornered prey deciding whether to fight or flee. Who taught you to use the vents? He asked, his voice gentler than it had been in years. Mama did. Serafina's small hands twisted in her lap. She said sometimes the safest way out is through places people think are too small to matter. Tactical thinking. Advanced problem solving. This wasn't a child raised in safety, this was a child trained to survive. Woo-sik's instincts, honed by years in the underworld, began assembling a picture he didn't like. Your mother's name? Catherine Frost. The girl's voice cracked on the name. They took her from our apartment. The man with the scar said she stole something that belonged to him, but Mama doesn't steal. She builds things. She makes things work. Catherine Frost. The name sparked recognition in the back of Woo-sik's mind, an American logistics consultant who'd made waves in Seoul's shipping industry over the past year. Brilliant, by all accounts. Independent. The kind of woman who didn't ask permission to operate in spaces men thought they owned. Where did they take her? The old warehouse by the river. Incheon district. Serafina pulled a crumpled paper from her pocket with trembling fingers. It wasn't a child's drawing. It was a hand-sketched map, complete with guard rotations, entry points, and structural weak points marked in precise detail. Mama made me memorize it. She said if anything bad happened, I should find someone powerful and show them this. Woo-sik took the paper, his trained eyes scanning the tactical genius embedded in every line. This wasn't desperation, this was warfare. Catherine Frost had known she was a target and had prepared her daughter for the worst. The question was, what had she done to warrant this kind of attention? His driver glanced in the rearview mirror. Boss, we've handled the situation at the club. False alarm, the car crash was teenagers joyriding, but Junho is asking for orders. Something cold slithered down Woo-sik's spine. Junho, his second-in-command for 3 years, loyal to a fault, or so he'd thought, but the timing was too convenient, the distraction too perfectly placed. Tell Junho to secure the club and wait for my return, Woo-sik said carefully, watching Serafina's face as a memory of Mina superimposed itself over her features. His sister had been 8 when she died. This girl was 7, close enough to reopen wounds he'd thought were sealed. As they pulled away from the Sapphire Club, Woo-sik's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The American woman knows too much. Jae-ha will extract what he needs by sunrise. If you interfere, you break the truce. Jae-ha. The name made Woo-sik's jaw tighten. A rival faction leader who'd been pushing boundaries for months, testing the limits of their uneasy peace. If Jae-ha was involved, this wasn't random violence, it was calculated intimidation with a specific target. Woo-sik looked down at Serafina, who was fighting to keep her eyes open, exhaustion and fear finally catching up to her small body. She'd risked everything to save her mother, had broken into a fortress to beg a monster for help, the kind of courage that should have been impossible at her age. Sleep, he told her quietly, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it over her small shoulders. I'll get your mother back. Promise? Her voice was barely a whisper. He should have said nothing. Promises were leverage. Promises were weakness. But when he looked at her face, All he could see was Minna's final moments, her hand going cold in his while he made promises he couldn't keep. "I promise." As Serafina's breathing evened out into sleep, Woo-sik pulled out his phone and made a call. Not to Junho, to Hyun-soo, his oldest friend and the only man in his organization he trusted without question. "I need a team, full tactical gear, and I need you to monitor Junho's communications without him knowing." Hyun-soo's voice came through steady and questioning. "What's happening?" "Either I'm about to save a woman I've never met," Woo-sik said, watching the city lights blur past the window, "or I'm walking into a trap set by my own second in command. Either way, someone's going to bleed before sunrise." He ended the call and looked down at the blueprint Catherine Frost had prepared for her daughter. Every detail was perfect, every calculation precise. This woman wasn't just smart, she was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with violence, the kind of dangerous that made men like Jae-ha desperate. The car turned toward Incheon, and Woo-sik felt the ice in his chest crack a little wider. For 5 years, he'd existed in a state of controlled numbness, moving through the underworld like a ghost who'd forgotten what it meant to care. But this child, with her clicking beads and desperate courage, had reminded him of something he'd tried to bury with Minna. Some things were worth breaking your own rules for. Behind them, in the shadows of the Sapphire Club, Junho lifted his radio one more time. His voice was cold, efficient, devoid of the loyalty he'd performed for years. "Target is mobile with the child. He's headed to Incheon. Tell Jae-ha he has exactly 23 minutes to finish the extraction before the dragon arrives. And make it look like an accident. We need Woo-sik to think he failed to save her." The pieces were in motion. The trap was set. And Choi Woo-sik, the man who'd spent 5 years trusting no one and feeling nothing, was about to learn that the heart he'd tried to freeze could still bleed. The Incheon warehouse district was a graveyard of rusted metal and broken promises, where legitimate business died and the underworld thrived in its corpse. Woo-sik's convoy moved through the industrial maze like sharks through dark water, headlights cutting through the fog that rolled off the Han River. Serafina stirred in the back seat, her small body jerking awake with a gasp. The beads in her hair clicked as she sat up, disoriented and afraid. Woo-sik watched her in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, he wasn't in this car at all. He was in another vehicle, 8 years ago, with Minna's head in his lap and her blood soaking through his shirt. She'd been wearing beaded braids too, a gift from a classmate she'd wanted to impress. The beads had clicked just like Serafina's when the car had taken that final turn, when the ambush had erupted in gunfire, when everything Woo-sik loved had been ripped away in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "We're almost there, aren't we?" Serafina's voice was small but steady, braver than any child should have to be. "Yes." Woo-sik forced himself back to the present, to this moment, to this child he might actually be able to save. "Stay in the car when we arrive, no matter what you hear." "But Mama, we'll be safer if you're not in the line of fire." His tone left no room for argument, but he softened it with something he hadn't offered anyone in years. "Honesty. I can't protect you both if I'm worried about where you are. Trust me to bring her back." Serafina studied him with eyes far too old for her face, then nodded slowly. She understood survival math. She understood sacrifice. Catherine Frost had raised a warrior, even if the battlefield was bigger than any child should face. Hyun-soo's voice crackled through the comm unit in Woo-sik's ear. "We're in position. 3 guards visible on the perimeter, but thermal imaging shows at least 15 bodies inside. Jae-ha's serious about this. And Junho? His phone's been pinging cell towers between here and the club. He made 4 calls in the last 10 minutes, all to burner numbers." Hyun-soo paused, and Woo-sik could hear the anger beneath his careful tone. "He's playing both sides, boss. Has been for months, probably. The betrayal should have hurt. Should have felt like something. But Woo-sik had built his empire on the assumption that everyone had a price, that loyalty was just another transaction waiting to expire. Junho had simply proven him right. What did hurt, though, was the memory of Minna. The way he'd trusted the wrong people then, too. The way he'd been too slow, too sentimental, too human to see the trap until it was already sprung. "If I die in there," Woo-sik said quietly, "make sure the girl gets somewhere safe, somewhere far from Seoul. You're not dying in there." "If I do, Hyun-soo, promise me." The line went silent for a long moment. Then, "I promise. But you're coming out, and you're bringing the American woman with you, because I'm not explaining to that little girl why we failed." Wusik's Mercedes stopped 50 meters from the warehouse, hidden behind a stack of shipping containers. Through the windshield, he could see the building, a 3-story structure of corrugated steel and shattered windows, the kind of place where screams died before they could reach the street. Somewhere inside, Catherine Frost was running out of time. He checked his weapon, a sleek black Glock that felt like an extension of his hand. Around him, Hyunsu's team moved into position, ghosts in tactical gear melting into the shadows. They were the best in Seoul. Men who'd followed Wusik through 7 years of gang wars and territory disputes. They'd die for him if necessary. Tonight, he hoped it wouldn't be. Wusik turned to look at Serafina one last time. She sat perfectly still in his jacket, her small hands gripping the leather like a lifeline. Their eyes met, and in that moment, they understood each other completely. Both of them knew what it meant to lose someone. Both of them knew what it meant to fight anyway. "Bring her back," Serafina whispered. "I will." He stepped out into the night, and the ghost of Minna walked beside him, a constant reminder of what happened when you were too late. But this time would be different. This time, he would be fast enough, ruthless enough, willing enough to burn the entire underworld down if that's what it took. Inside the warehouse, Jae-ha pressed a blade to Catherine Frost's throat, and Junho's voice crackled through a radio. The dragon just entered the kill zone. Spring the trap. Catherine Frost had stopped counting the hours 3 interrogations ago. Time became meaningless when every minute was measured in pain, in the cold concrete beneath her knees, in the zip ties cutting circulation from her wrists. But she hadn't stopped thinking. Thinking was the only weapon they couldn't take from her. The warehouse was a logistics expert's nightmare, and opportunity rolled into one. She'd mapped every exit within the first hour, catalogued every structural weakness, noted the patterns in the guards' rotations. Jae-ha thought he was holding her captive. In reality, she was conducting reconnaissance. She was 32 years old, born in Atlanta and raised on her grandmother's stories about women who survived impossible things. Her brown skin bore the marks of Jae-ha's impatience bruises blooming purple across her cheekbone. Split lips still bleeding, but her dark eyes remained sharp, calculating, alive with defiance that no amount of violence could extinguish. "Last chance, Miss Frost." Jae-ha circled her like a shark scenting blood. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of polished cruelty that came from men who'd never been told no. His suit was expensive, his hands manicured, his smile the worst kind of weapon. "The master access codes to your logistics network. Give them to me, and this ends quickly." "You think I'm stupid enough to memorize codes worth $50 million? Catherine's voice came out hoarse but steady. "They're biometric encrypted. Even if I wanted to give them to you, I couldn't." It was a lie. The codes existed in her head, a string of numbers and algorithms she could recite in her sleep. But Jae-ha didn't need to know that. He needed to believe she was more valuable alive than dead, at least until Serafina had time to reach help. "Please, baby girl," she prayed silently. "Please have found someone who gives a damn." Jae-ha's blade pressed harder against her throat, and she felt warm blood trickle down her neck. "Then we have a problem. Because my buyer doesn't accept excuses, and I've already promised him access to every shipping route between Seoul and Singapore. Your buyer's going to be disappointed." Catherine smiled through the blood on her lips, an expression that was pure venom wrapped in grace. "Because 20 minutes ago, I triggered a remote lockdown. Every system you wanted, frozen. Every file you need, corrupted beyond recovery. And every law enforcement agency with jurisdiction over international shipping, they just received an anonymous tip about your operations." The lie was so beautiful she almost believed it herself. In truth, she'd done something far more dangerous. She'd sent a signal, a specific frequency that would ping every device within a 5-mile radius that was tuned to her emergency protocol. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but Serafina was smart enough to find someone powerful, and powerful men in Seoul's underworld monitored frequencies most people didn't know existed. Jae-ha's face transformed, rage replacing his calculated composure. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Catherine met his eyes without flinching. "Go ahead, check your servers. I'll wait." One of Jae-ha's men rushed forward with a tablet, his face pale. "Boss, she's telling the truth. The mainframe's locked. Every access point is showing authentication errors." Catherine hadn't actually locked anything, she'd simply triggered a cascading login failure that would resolve itself in 40 minutes. But 40 minutes was an eternity in this game. 40 minutes was enough time for Serafina to find help. 40 minutes was enough time for a miracle. Jae-ha grabbed Catherine by her natural curls, yanking her head back so violently stars exploded across her vision. Then you're going to unlock it. Right now. Can't. She spit blood at his feet, the gesture more defiant than any curse. See, that's the beautiful thing about automated security protocols. Once they're triggered, only time can reset them. No manual override, no emergency access. Just patience. I don't have patience. Then I guess you have a problem. Catherine's smile widened, even as pain radiated through her skull. Because the only thing worse than failing your buyer is delivering damaged goods. Kill me, and those codes die too. Hurt me more, and I might forget the decryption sequence. You're trapped, Jeha, by your own greed. The warehouse suddenly groaned, a deep metallic sound that made everyone freeze. Then came the impact, massive, deliberate. The sound of something very large and very determined hitting the reinforced doors. Jeha's eyes widened. What did you do? Catherine's smile turned savage, victorious, absolutely feral. I sent a signal to the only man in Seoul you're actually afraid of. And judging by that sound, he just arrived. The doors exploded inward with a screech of tearing metal, and through the smoke and chaos, a figure emerged. Tall, controlled, moving with the kind of lethal grace that made predators look clumsy. The dragon tattoo on his neck seemed to writhe in the flickering emergency lights. Choi Woo-sik had entered the kill zone, and he looked like vengeance wearing a human face. Woo-sik saw her immediately. Even through the smoke and chaos, even with 15 armed men between them, his eyes found Catherine Frost like a magnet finding north. She was on her knees, wrists bound, blood trailing down her throat, but her spine was straight. Her head was high. She looked like a queen forced to kneel but refusing to bow. Their eyes locked, and something jolted through him, recognition without ever having met, understanding without words. She'd done this. She'd orchestrated her own rescue by teaching her daughter how to breach fortresses and betting everything on a stranger's humanity. The audacity of it, the brilliant desperation, hit him like a physical blow. Then he saw the red dot. Sniper laser, perfectly centered on Catherine's forehead, invisible to her but blazing like a brand to his trained eyes. His body moved before his mind caught up. Instinct overriding strategy. Down! He roared. Catherine dropped flat as the shot cracked through the air, the bullet passing through empty space where her head had been. Woo-sik was already moving, his weapon tracking the source of the laser to a catwalk 30 feet up. He fired twice. The sniper's body tumbled over the railing. Chaos erupted. Jeha's men opened fire from behind shipping crates. Hyunsu's team returned fire from the entrance. The warehouse became a symphony of violence, muzzle flashes painting the darkness in strobe light horror. But Woo-sik's focus never wavered from Catherine. He moved through the gunfire like water flowing around stones, dropping 2 guards who tried to flank him. A third lunged with a knife. Woo-sik caught his wrist, twisted, and used the man's own momentum to drive the blade into his partner's shoulder. "Boss, we've got a problem." Hyunsu's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Junho's here. He's leading a second team through the east entrance." So the trap was springing. Junho had waited until Woo-sik was committed, surrounded, vulnerable. The betrayal was textbook isolate the target, overwhelm with numbers, eliminate the threat to your own ambitions. In another life, Woo-sik might have even admired the efficiency. "How many?" he asked, his voice calm even as he put down another attacker. 8, maybe 10. They're heavily armed. Woo-sik's jaw tightened. He'd brought 6 men. Against 25 enemies and a traitor who knew all his tactics. The math wasn't favorable, but he'd promised a 7-year-old girl he'd bring her mother home, and Choi Woo-sik didn't break promises to children. Not anymore. He reached Catherine's position, dropping into a crouch beside her. Up close, she was even more striking, high cheekbones, full lips split but still defiant, eyes that burned with intelligence and rage. She'd been crying. He could see the salt tracks through the blood and grime, but she wasn't crying now. "You came," she breathed, and there was wonder in her voice beneath the pain. "Your daughter is very persuasive." He pulled a tactical knife from his belt and sliced through her zip ties in one smooth motion. Her wrists were raw, bleeding where the plastic had cut deep. "Can you run? Can you keep them off me?" "Yes, then I can run." She gripped his forearm as he helped her up, her fingers pressing into his skin with desperate strength. "But there's something you need to know. This isn't just about me. Jeha's working for someone bigger, someone who wants your territory. Junho." "I know about Junho." Their eyes met again, and in that moment, understanding, passed between them like electricity. They were both people who'd been betrayed. Both people who'd learned to trust their instincts over their hearts. Both people who recognized a kindred spirit when they saw one. "We need to reach that terminal." Catherine pointed to a control station across the warehouse floor. "I can override the automated systems. Buy us time. You're injured. And you're outnumbered." Her smile was sharp enough to cut. "I'm a logistics expert, Mr. Wusik. Let me do what I do best. Get me to that terminal, and I'll show you how to win an impossible fight." The east entrance exploded inward. Junho stepped through the smoke with 10 men at his back, his weapon raised, his face transformed from loyal lieutenant to ambitious predator. "Sorry, boss," Junho called across the warehouse, his voice echoing off metal walls. "But the crown doesn't fit you anymore. Time for new management." Wusik's hand found Catherine's, their fingers intertwining for just a moment. Her pulse hammered against his palm, fast and fierce and alive. "Stay close," he said quietly. "Try to keep up," she countered. Then they ran. Bullets chased them across the warehouse floor, sparking off metal and concrete. Catherine's legs burned, her vision swimming from blood loss and adrenaline, but she kept pace with Wusik as he wove between shipping containers with practiced efficiency. He moved like violence personified, every step deliberate, every turn calculated to keep his body between her and the gunfire. 20 seconds, she gasped, her eyes locked on the control terminal ahead. Wusik fired over his shoulder without looking, and somewhere behind them a man screamed, "Hyunsu, we need cover on the north approach." "Working on it, boss." The terminal loomed closer, a dated computer system wired into the warehouse's automated crane network. Catherine had worked with similar setups across 3 continents. She knew their weaknesses, their back doors, their potential for creative destruction. 10 feet away. 5. Junho's voice cut through the chaos. "Cut them off. Don't let her reach that terminal." Wusik spun, putting himself directly in the line of fire. 3 rounds hit his shoulder, his side, his leg, except they didn't. He'd positioned himself behind a steel support beam at the last possible second, using the architecture itself as a shield. But the move cost him. He stumbled, his weapon clattering to the ground. Catherine didn't hesitate. She grabbed his arm, hauling him the final distance to the terminal. Her hands flew across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over as lines of code scrolled across the ancient monitor. "What are you doing?" Wusik asked through gritted teeth, retrieving his weapon. "Changing the rules." Her fingers never stopped moving. This warehouse uses an automated overhead crane system for moving shipping containers. GPS-guided, weight sensors, the whole package. Jaha never bothered to change the default admin password. She hit enter, and the warehouse groaned to life. Above them, massive industrial cranes began to move. 20-ton shipping containers swung through the air on steel cables, their paths suddenly erratic, unpredictable. The automated system that had been designed for efficiency became a deadly maze of moving metal. Jaha's men scattered, shouting in confusion as containers swung past their heads. One soldier wasn't fast enough. The steel box caught him mid-chest, sending him flying 15 feet into a concrete pillar. "You're insane," Wusik said, but there was admiration in his voice, something warm breaking through the ice. "I'm effective." Catherine's hands danced across the keyboard, orchestrating chaos. East quadrant, 3 men behind the blue container. Move it 12 feet left in 3, 2, 1. The container shifted, and Hyunsu's team had clear shots. 3 men down. Northwest corner, sniper on the catwalk. "I see him." Wusik's shot was perfect. The sniper dropped. They fell into rhythm, Catherine conducting the deadly symphony, while Wusik executed the movements. She called targets, created openings, turned the warehouse into a 3-dimensional puzzle that only she could solve. He protected her blind spots, trusted her calls without question, moved with the kind of lethal precision that made her understand why men called him the Dragon. Junho's forces, caught between crossfire and moving containers, began to fall back. But Junho himself was advancing, his face twisted with rage, his weapon trained directly on Catherine. "Enough games," he roared. "You think you're clever, American? You think you've won?" Wusik moved to intercept, but 3 of Junho's men blocked his path. He'd have to go through them, and that would take time they didn't have. Catherine's fingers flew across the keyboard one final time. Above Junho's head, a container loaded with machine parts swung into position. She looked at him through the monitor's reflection and smiled. "I don't think I'm clever," she said quietly. "I know I am." She hit enter. The container dropped. Junho dove at the last second, but the falling steel clipped his shoulder, sending him sprawling. His weapon skittered across the floor. Woo-sik was on him in seconds, his knee on Junho's chest, his gun pressed to his former friend's temple. "Give me one reason," Woo-sik said, his voice colder than death. Junho laughed, blood bubbling at his lips. "Because this isn't over. Check the east wall. See what your girlfriend didn't notice." Catherine's blood turned to ice. She spun toward the east wall, where red digital numbers glowed in the darkness. A timer, counting down. 58 seconds. The warehouse was rigged to explode, and they were standing at ground zero. 58 seconds wasn't enough time to think. It was barely enough time to survive. "Everyone out!" Woo-sik's command cut through the chaos. His men moved instantly, trained for exactly this kind of disaster. Hyun-soo grabbed Junho, dragging the wounded traitor toward the exit. Woo-sik's hand closed around Catherine's wrist. "Run, now." They ran. 45 seconds. The east exit was closest but blocked by debris. 38 seconds. North entrance compromised by fire from the earlier exchange. Catherine's mind calculated trajectories, distances, probabilities, all while her body screamed in protest. "The loading dock," she gasped, pointing to a bay door on the west wall. 30 meters, 29 seconds. Woo-sik pulled her forward with strength that should have hurt but instead felt like the only solid thing in a collapsing world. They burst through the bay door as the timer hit 15. Woo-sik threw them both behind a parked delivery truck just as the warehouse erupted. The explosion was a physical force, a wall of heat and pressure that picked them up and slammed them into the ground. Catherine felt Woo-sik's body cover hers, shielding her from the rain of debris and fire. His weight pressed her into the concrete, his breath hot against her neck, and for one suspended moment, the world was nothing but heat and darkness, and the thundering of two hearts that had somehow survived. Then silence. Ringing, absolute silence broken only by the crackle of flames. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, strained. "I don't know." Catherine realized she was shaking, her hands fisted in his shirt. "Are you?" "I don't know." They stayed like that for another heartbeat, neither willing to move, neither ready to face what came next. Then Woo-sik shifted, and Catherine felt the warm wetness spreading across his side. Blood, his blood. "You're hit." She pushed herself up, ignoring her own pain. In the firelight, she could see the wound clearly, a bullet graze across his ribs, deep enough to bleed, but not deep enough to kill. "You need medical attention." Later, he stood slowly, pulling her up with him. His jaw was tight with pain he refused to acknowledge. "We need to move before." "Police! Nobody move!" Flashing lights cut through the smoke. Squad cars, at least 6 of them, blocking every exit. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, and at the center of them stood a man in a tailored suit and cold expression. Inspector Han. Catherine recognized him from the news, the corruption watchdog who'd made his career busting trafficking rings. Except his eyes, as they fixed on Woo-sik, held something that looked less like justice and more like personal vendetta. "Choi Woo-sik." Inspector Han called out, his voice carrying over the chaos. "You're under arrest for destruction of property, illegal weapons possession, and suspected involvement in organized crime." Woo-sik's hand found Catherine's again, a brief squeeze of warning and apology. "This is Jaeha's insurance policy," he murmured. "The explosion was never meant to kill us, just force us into the open where the law could finish the job." Catherine's mind raced. They were trapped, wounded, surrounded by police who might be legitimate or might be on Jaeha's payroll. Either way, if Woo-sik was arrested, he'd be dead before sunrise. Men like him didn't survive in custody, they became liabilities that needed to be eliminated. "Do you trust me?" she whispered. Woo-sik looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. This woman who'd been tortured and hunted, who'd orchestrated her own rescue, who'd turned a warehouse into a weapon with nothing but a keyboard and courage, she was asking him to trust her. "Yes," he said simply. Catherine straightened, squared her shoulders, and stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd negotiated million-dollar contracts and didn't back down from power. "Inspector Han, I'm Catherine Frost, CEO of Frost Logistics International. This man just saved my life from kidnappers. Before you arrest anyone, I suggest you check with the American Embassy." I filed a formal complaint 3 hours ago about the abduction of an American citizen on Korean soil. This man isn't a criminal, he's a concerned citizen who responded to a child's plea for help. The lie was beautiful, smooth, absolutely confident. Inspector Han hesitated, and in that hesitation, Catherine saw their chance. Now, she continued, her hand slipping into Woo-sik's with the casual intimacy of a partner, not a stranger. Unless you want an international incident, I suggest we all go somewhere civilized and sort this out properly. My lawyers are already en route. She smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who'd just checkmated a king. Inspector Han's expression darkened. He pulled out his phone, made a terse call, then looked back at them with barely contained fury. My superiors want you both brought in for questioning. Voluntarily. The word was acid. You have 1 hour to arrange legal counsel before we proceed. 1 hour, 60 minutes to figure out how to survive what came next. As they were escorted to separate squad cars, Woo-sik caught Catherine's eyes one last time. In that glance was a question, an acknowledgement, and something else. Something neither of them was ready to name, but both of them felt burning in the space between them. They'd survived the explosion. The question was whether they'd survive what came after. The interrogation room smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. Catherine sat across from Inspector Han, her wrists bandaged, her lawyer a sharp woman named Park Ji-won who'd arrived exactly 43 minutes into their hour seated beside her. Woo-sik was somewhere else in the building, separated from her by walls and protocol and the weight of his reputation. Let's go over this one more time, Inspector Han said, his voice dripping with skepticism. You're claiming that Jae-ha-min kidnapped you for corporate espionage? I'm not claiming anything. I'm stating facts. Catherine's voice was steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. Jae-ha wanted access to my logistics network. When I refused to sell, he decided to take it by force. Check my phone records. Check my office security footage. Check the emergency signal I sent to the embassy. Park Ji-won slid a tablet across the table. Everything my client has stated is documented here. Timestamps, digital evidence, witness statements from her neighbors who saw her being taken. Unless you have evidence suggesting otherwise, Inspector, we're done here. Inspector Han's jaw tightened. He pulled out his own phone, scrolled through something, then looked up with eyes that had gone cold and calculating. And Mr. Choi, what's your relationship with him? He saved my daughter from a burning building last year. The lie came easily now. Built on a foundation of truth, Serafina had been in danger. Woo-sik had responded. A child was safe. When she couldn't reach me, she remembered him. He came when a 7-year-old asked for help. That makes him a hero, not a criminal. A hero with a criminal record. A sealed juvenile record that was expunged 8 years ago. Park Ji-won interrupted smoothly. Mr. Choi runs legitimate security consulting firm. Everything he did tonight falls under citizens' intervention in the case of kidnapping. Unless you have evidence of wrongdoing, Inspector, you're wasting everyone's time. The door opened. Another officer leaned in, whispered something to Inspector Han. Whatever he said made the inspector's face go carefully blank. You're free to go, he said finally, each word forced out like broken glass. Both of you. Catherine didn't let her relief show. She stood slowly, gathering her things with deliberate calm. I'll expect a formal apology from the department for the delay in responding to my kidnapping. 3 hours, Inspector Han. That's how long I was held before civilian intervention saved my life. She walked out with her head high, every step a performance of confidence she didn't entirely feel. In the hallway, Woo-sik stood with Hyun-soo, his side bandaged beneath a fresh shirt someone had brought. When his eyes found hers, something electric passed between them, recognition, gratitude, and beneath it all, something darker and far more dangerous. Miss Frost, he said formally, his voice neutral for the officers watching. I'm glad you're safe. Thanks to you. She crossed the distance between them, and suddenly they were too close, the air too thick. She could smell smoke on his skin, see the faint tremor in his hands from blood loss, feel the heat radiating off him like a furnace. I owe you my life. You saved yourself, he said quietly. I just provided backup. We saved each other. The truth of it hung between them. Undeniable. They were strangers who'd become allies. Allies who'd become something else entirely in the space of one impossible night. Outside the station, dawn was breaking over Seoul. Catherine's car was waiting, but she couldn't make herself move toward it. Not yet. Not when Woo-sik was standing there looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. like she was dangerous and fascinating and entirely unexpected. "Your daughter," he said. "Serafina? She's at my associate's safe house. Hyunsu's wife is with her. She's been asking for you." Catherine's chest tightened. "Thank you for keeping her safe. She's remarkable, like her mother." The compliment landed like a caress, intimate despite the formal distance between them. Catherine felt herself leaning forward, drawn by gravity or madness or something she couldn't name. Woo-sik's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression went from warm to frozen in a heartbeat. "What is it?" He turned the screen toward her, a text from an unknown number. "We have the girl, real creative, using a fake safe house address. Bring the American woman to Uedo Park, Pier 7 Sunrise. Come alone or we start mailing pieces." Catherine's world tilted. "That's impossible. Serafina is safe. You said—" "I said she was at Hyunsu's safe house." Woo-sik was already moving, his phone to his ear. "Hyunsu, check on the package. Now." The pause was infinite, eternal. Then Hyunsu's voice came through, tinny and horrified. "Boss, she's gone. There's blood on the floor. Someone breached the safe room." Catherine's knees buckled. Woo-sik caught her, his hands gripping her arms with fierce certainty. "We're getting her back," he said, and his voice was a promise carved from steel and fury. "I don't care who took her. I don't care what it costs. We're bringing your daughter home." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, Catherine saw the truth. This wasn't just about Serafina anymore. Something had shifted between them, something that made the danger irrelevant and the cost immaterial. "Then let's go," she said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her heart. "And this time, we're finishing this." They moved toward Woo-sik's car together. Two people bound by blood and fire and a child who needed them both to be more than they'd ever been before. Uedo Park at sunrise looked like a postcard of serenity, the Han River painted gold, joggers starting their morning routines, the city waking up innocent and unaware. But beneath the beauty, Catherine felt only darkness. Somewhere in this peaceful landscape, her daughter was terrified, and every second that passed was another second Serafina believed no one was coming. "The pier is 200 meters ahead," Woo-sik said, his eyes scanning the landscape with tactical precision. "Hyunsu's team is positioned in the tree line. The moment we have visual confirmation of Serafina, they move. Unless it's a trap designed to kill you the moment you show your face." Catherine's voice was tighter than she wanted, fear bleeding through despite her best efforts. "Then it's a good thing I'm not going in alone." They'd argued about this in the car, him insisting she stay behind, her refusing with a fury that surprised them both. Serafina was her daughter, her responsibility, her reason for breathing, and if Woo-sik thought she'd sit in safety while her baby was in danger, he didn't know her at all. The pier emerged from the morning mist, like a skeletal finger pointing toward the river. At the end stood a figure tall, familiar, wrong. Junho, bloodied, one arm in a makeshift sling, but very much alive, and beside him, small and terrified in her torn white dress, was Serafina. Catherine's heart stopped, started, exploded into motion that had nothing to do with rhythm and everything to do with survival. "Mama!" Serafina's scream cut through the morning calm. Catherine moved. Woo-sik's hand shot out, catching her arm. "Wait, something's wrong. My daughter is out there, and Junho is too confident for a man who just lost everything." Woo-sik's eyes narrowed, reading the scene like a book written in blood. "He's got backup we can't see." Junho's voice carried across the water, touching, really. The dragon and his new pet, here to play hero. He pressed a gun to Serafina's head, and Catherine felt her soul fracture. "Here's how this works. You step down, Woo-sik. Publicly. Transfer your territory, your contacts, your crown to me. Or I paint this pier with a child's brain. You won't?" Woo-sik said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Because the moment you pull that trigger, you lose your only leverage. Kill the girl, and nothing stops me from ending you." "Maybe." Junho's smile was poison. "Or maybe I'm betting you've gone soft, that you actually care about saving this brat. Either way, you lose. Give up your empire or watch another little girl die. How's that for choices?" The words hit Woo-sik like bullets. Catherine saw it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his breathing changed. This was his nightmare made real Min-ah all over again, the choice between power and humanity, between who he'd been and who he might become. "There's a third option," Catherine said quietly, her hand finding Woo-sik's. "We outthink him. She pulled out her phone with her free hand, her fingers moving across the screen with deliberate precision. Junho, you made a mistake. You chose a location I know intimately. I negotiated a shipping contract for the ferry company that operates out of this pier. I have administrative access to their scheduling system. Junho's confidence flickered. What are you? Catherine hit send. Behind Junho, the massive ferry approaching the pier let out a blast from its horn. The sound was deafening, disorienting, perfectly timed. Junho flinched. Serafina dropped flat like her mother had taught her. Woo-sik moved. 20 meters became 10, became 5 in heartbeats. Junho recovered, swinging his weapon toward the charging dragon. But Catherine was faster. She'd grabbed Hyunsu's backup weapon in the car, and now she raised it with hands that remembered her father's shooting lessons. She didn't aim for Junho. She aimed for the wooden post beside him, the one supporting the pier's decorative lamp. The bullet splintered wood. The structure groaned, and the lamp swung down like a pendulum, catching Junho across the shoulders and driving him to his knees. Woo-sik reached Serafina, scooping her up as gunfire erupted from the tree line. Junho's hidden backup revealing themselves too late. Hyunsu's team engaged, and the serene morning became a battlefield. But Woo-sik was already running. Serafina clutched to his chest, his body a shield between her and the chaos. He reached Catherine, grabbed her hand, and they ran together as the world exploded behind them. They didn't stop until they reached the car, until Serafina was in Catherine's arms, until mother and daughter were sobbing against each other while Woo-sik stood guard, his weapon trained on the park, ready to burn down Seoul itself if anyone tried to take this from them. It's over, Catherine whispered into Serafina's hair. Baby, it's over. But as Woo-sik looked back at the pier, at the bodies being loaded into ambulances, at Junho being dragged away in handcuffs, he knew the truth. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. 6 months later, Seoul had learned to whisper new stories. They spoke of the dragon who hadn't abdicated his throne but had transformed it into something the underworld had never seen before. Choi Woo-sik still controlled Gangnam, still commanded respect that bordered on fear, but now his empire operated with a precision that left no room for the chaos that had once defined it. No more kidnappings in his territory, no more trafficking, no more collateral damage that touched innocent lives. The streets were safer, even if the man who made them so remained dangerous. Catherine stood in her rebuilt office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city that had tried to destroy her and failed. Frost Logistics International had not only survived the attack, it had thrived. Her network now spanned 12 countries, her reputation for impossible solutions preceding her into every negotiation. She'd turned her trauma into armor, her fear into fuel. But it was the photograph on her desk that told the real story. Serafina, laughing in a park, her white dress replaced by jeans and a bright yellow jacket, her smile wide and unbroken. Beside her stood Woo-sik, his expression softer than anyone who knew the dragon would believe possible, his hand resting on the child's shoulder with a protectiveness that needed no explanation. They hadn't fallen in love. That would be too simple, too dishonest for what they'd become. Instead, they'd built something more complex, a partnership forged in fire, maintained through mutual respect, deepened by understanding that some bonds transcended romance. Woo-sik had become the person Serafina ran to with scraped knees and school problems. Catherine had become the voice that could talk Woo-sik back from the edge when the darkness threatened to reclaim him. They had dinner twice a week. They consulted on each other's business decisions. They existed in each other's lives with an intimacy that had nothing to do with shared beds and everything to do with shared survival. The world kept waiting for them to announce a relationship. The world would keep waiting. A knock on her door pulled Catherine from her thoughts. Woo-sik entered, immaculate as always in a charcoal suit, the dragon on his neck visible as he'd stopped hiding it months ago, but it was what he carried that made her breath catch a small velvet box. "Before you panic," he said, reading her expression with the ease of someone who'd learned her language. "It's not that kind of box." Catherine laughed, the sound genuine and light. "Then what kind of box is it?" He opened it. Inside lay 2 matching bracelets, simple braided leather with small silver charms. One charm was a dragon, the other was a phoenix. Serafina made them, Woo-sik explained, his voice carrying an emotion he still struggled to name. "She said we needed something to remind us that we're a team, that we saved each other." Catherine's eyes burned. She took one bracelet, feeling the careful stitching, the love woven into every thread. "She's right. We did save each other. Woo-sik fastened the bracelet around her wrist, his fingers brushing her skin with a familiarity that spoke of trust rather than desire. I never thanked you properly, for showing me that strength isn't the absence of feeling, it's choosing to feel despite the cost. And I never thanked you, Catherine countered, securing the second bracelet on his wrist, for showing me that some people are worth trusting, even when trust feels impossible. They stood there, two warriors who'd found peace not through love but through something rarer. Genuine friendship built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared trauma transformed into shared strength. Woo-sik's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted into something calculating and cold, the dragon emerging as business called. But before he left, he paused at the door. Dinner tonight? Serafina wants to show us her science project. I'll bring dessert. She'll hold you to that. After he left, Catherine returned to the window, watching Soul spread beneath her like a promise she'd learned to keep. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, terrified, bleeding, certain she'd die in a warehouse. She thought about the man who'd been a ghost in expensive clothes, convinced he was beyond redemption. They'd both been wrong about their endings. And somehow, in being wrong together, they'd found something better than either had imagined. Her phone lit up with a text from Serafina. Mama, Mr. Woo-sik said you're bringing cake. Make it chocolate or I'm calling child services. Catherine smiled, her heart full in ways that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with family, the kind you chose, the kind you built, the kind that saved you when you needed it most. Outside her window, Soul glittered with possibility, and for the first time in her life, Catherine Frost felt truly, impossibly free. Strength is not found in the absence of vulnerability, but in the courage to remain soft in a world that rewards hardness, to choose connection over isolation, trust over cynicism, and humanity over survival. If you loved this story of survival, strategy, and the family we choose, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because next week, we're diving into a tale that'll make this look tame. Drop a comment telling me what moment had you holding your breath, and from me to you, Happy New Year. May your year be filled with the courage to trust, the strength to survive, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the best love stories aren't about romance, they're about finding your people and refusing to let them go. Until next time, this is Ruthless Romance Tales, reminding you that the most dangerous thing you can do is care, but sometimes it's worth the risk.